Bear down, Bears fans. Another edition of the Chicago Bears podcast coming your way. Pat the designer, if you hear some water in the background, it's because you got to get away. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes you got to go away. We got a little time off, but not enough time off to not talk about cut down day. Pat the designer, Courtney Cronin in the building. And Courtney on another flight, the hardest working woman in sports talk. Courtney, what's going on?
Not much. I am, whoever's going to be hearing this podcast is going to be hearing it live in the United Club at Newark Airport. And that's just how we're rolling today. It's cut down day. It's a big day across the NFL. Nearly 1,000 players get released. And this roster that the Bears assembled, 37 cuts. I think there were 9 that came through you on Monday, and then the rest of them came today. Not a whole ton of surprises. And even in years past, there haven't been a lot of surprises since this regime took over in 2022. But now there's so much more talent that it does make their job a little bit harder when they're trying to work out those final couple spots.
No, for sure. And I think, listen, this is a simple day content-wise because there are 2 questions that every Bears fan in the world has right now. Are there any surprise cuts? And are there any additions that we expect? So let's start off with the number one, our team right here. Was there anybody who was released from this team that maybe you were a little bit shocked about? Or is there anything that you're hearing that may change based on some of those releases? We know that can happen sometimes.
So when they say, I just want to make sure people know, when they say they waive the following players and they release the following players, like that language effectively means the same thing. It's just based on, what your status is, how many years you've accrued in the NFL, whether you're a rookie, first-year player, or second-year player, or if you're a vested veteran. Anyways, I go through this list. We knew that they're keeping 2 quarterbacks on the roster, so they were not going to keep Austin Reed, nor were they going to keep Brett Rippon. One of them will be back on the practice squad. Whether I tend to think that, going with a higher ceiling guy in Austin Reed, he trained with Caleb Williams throughout the offseason before he got to Bears training, got to rookie camp and then got to training camp. My money's on him coming back here if they decide that they don't want to keep 2 quarterbacks on the practice squad. In the practice squad, you have a couple days to kind of formulate those things. And of course, there's waiver claims around the NFL that we'll have to keep an eye on to see if the Bears put a claim in for anybody else. Other than that, I'd say, I had Micah Baskerville. I had them keeping 6 linebackers. They end up keeping 6 defensive ends on the defensive line. So Micah Baskerville, I thought, played a hell of a training camp, preseason games. He had the pick 6, had multiple pick 6s because he had one in camp too.
Absolutely,
I thought he played great. I mean, obviously he outplayed Noah Sewell because Noah wasn't out there for anything except the last day of practice and that final preseason game. But you're a 4th-round pick from a year ago. Draft picks always have a longer leash. He made it on this roster over Baskerville, who showed a lot of potential. Would imagine Baskerville will end up being back on the practice squad at some point. But other than that, in terms of the cuts, you look at Blasingame, and I said this earlier on this podcast. I've said it on all of our shows on ESPN 1000 that
100%.
This is a player that they value in the locker room and on the field too. And it's my understanding that they're gonna, they're waiving him today with the intent that to bring him back. When I had checked in on this last week, I was given the idea, I was, told, hey, I bet this is probably a 10% chance that they don't bring him back. From my understanding, this is probably due to having to carry someone who we believe to be Patrick Scales, because we haven't seen him out there at training camp for a couple of weeks. He's dealing with a soft tissue injury in his back. They probably have to carry him on. The idea would be carrying him onto the 53-man roster so that they can then put him on injured reserve where he can, spend as much time as he needs before bringing him back. And then that would create a roster spot to then bring Blasingame back into the fold on the 53-man roster.
So you're expecting, because I'm not going to lie to you, Kari was a surprise cut for me today, or a wave, I guess, for me today, because of how we saw him utilized in the last couple of preseason games. I thought that they're early on, right, maybe keep an extra tight end. It didn't seem like they wanted to go with that, and then seeing Kari's name come across was a little bit of a shock to me. You expect Kari to be back on this team?
I do. And I think that his role is important in this offense. It's not just, the numbers game and all of that. He puts himself in a situation where he will be relied on, not just for blocking. I mean, he can line up in the backfield. He can, line up in the slot. He can do everything. He's a huge special teams player for them. I would
Right.
even like what we had been talking about going into roster cutdown day was, do they keep 4 tight ends or do they keep, all the running backs, which they did, and a fullback in addition there. I think so with the 3 tight ends that make the roster, Mercedes Lewis, Cole Kmet, and Gerald Everett, you're going to be relying on Kari Blasingame to have some sort of role in terms of run blocking, pass blocking, whatever it is. That's something that he excels at and is very good at. And you want that on this roster, despite the fact that Shane Waldron has not used a fullback in his offense prior to when he was a play caller in Seattle. So that didn't surprise me when you start like peeling back the layers of, okay, this is not something that they anticipate being like he's gone, he's going to go sign somewhere else. This is a way for him to, it's accounting for the roster more or less to be able to get somebody else through so they can get onto, because if you cut Patrick Scales today, I'm sure somebody would sign him. That's clearly their fear of
100%.
keeping a very injured player right now on the active roster instead of, just cutting him and then, seeing if, nobody signs him, then you can sign him back, whenever. But they want to get him on the IR. This is the way to do that. And you'll create a roster spot tomorrow to do that and then to bring Kari Blasingame back.
I thought what was interesting about Blasingame's name coming up was the first question I had outside of, wow, we actually cut him or waived him, I should say, was, is he an addition to this team because of some of the issues that the Bears have on the offensive line? We know that they kept Roschon Johnson here. Mercedes Lewis was an obvious keep on this team. But did you keep Kari Blasingame because of some of the abilities he has in the blocking game?
Yeah.
Because of the struggles that the Bears have offensive line-wise?
Yeah, I mean, his role as he's done a lot of that. Like as a fullback, being able to help out in pass protection, that's huge. We saw him do that the last couple of years with Justin Fields, the first 2 years that he played in Chicago, and I anticipate that being a role that he will have going forward. Now, I'm not saying the Bears are going to utilize the tight end position the way that we see San Francisco do it with Kyle Juszczyk. I don't think that he and Kari Blasingame are necessarily the same player, but he can do a lot more too than just block. I mean, his role in special teams, both on, kickoff and punt coverage, he's 4-phase special teamer. Like those roles are not, those are important roles to this team. So you have not just like his product, not probably just like, Chad Morton, his running backs coach, vouching for him. You have Richard Hightower being an advocate for Kari Blasingame in the room
100%.
when they're trying to break down like, okay, this guy versus that guy. And if they felt that somebody else would have signed him right away, kind of just like the way that they're feeling it out around the league, but also looking at other teams' cuts and in other teams' needs, which is what they do for 31 other teams throughout training camp. If they felt there was a risk, they wouldn't have done it this way. So this will be something that I imagine will take place tomorrow when they can, I think the deadline is 3 p.m. East, 3 p.m. Central time, that they have to place they can place Patrick Scales onto IR, create a roster spot, and then sign Kari Blasingame back to the 53 or to the 53.
I think one of the yes, 100% to the 53, right? Like, I think one of the big questions now, though, because of keeping Kari Blasingame, we didn't see a lot of the names that we thought maybe would be leaving the Chicago Bears due to the running back position and how deep they are. We didn't see a lot of those leave on this cut list. One in particular has been Velus Jones. Man, you've talked about Velus a lot on this podcast. I think that what we saw in that final game saved him maybe a little bit more. But when you see Velus Jones retained on this roster, I want to ask you this, though. When you talk about Ryan Poles, does it feel like maybe there's a little bit of a blind spot to his draft picks when you look at the guys that Ryan Poles have drafted have not been exited from this roster, and maybe there's major questions on them?
I mean, Ja'Tari Carter was one of the cuts yesterday. He ended up getting released, and I'm not surprised by that one. I do think that
was not a shot.
No, that one was not surprising, and even with the offensive line where it was, I don't think anybody had him on their final roster, or at least in my projections, there were other offensive linemen that had, that had put themselves in a better position. So that's the first at least of the draft picks, this time around, that's the only one that you saw leave. However,
Right.
I maintain this throughout the entire offseason. I never had Velus off my roster.
Right.
There's a couple of reasons why the Bears wouldn't cut him. He's a third round draft pick from 2 years ago. Usually you give guys until year 3, like through year 3 to figure it out. And
Yeah.
sometimes they come on, sometimes they don't. Like the first chance, they have to cut him. If he does something, if he messes up somehow, they will. And that's, you don't want a player to ever be like, okay, let's just become like, we'll wait and see if you become a liability and then we'll cut you. But he's fast. And I think running back, it's a simpler position in terms of not having to like execute as much of the route tree and the route concepts. And if you can use his speed to an advantage of yours on offense, then it's worth a roster spot. There's no real risk on it right now because he was drafted in the 3rd round for a reason. He's a talented player. If he can just put it together, he gives you the contributions on kick return and give you those contributions on offense, then you're in a good spot to know that you will get some contributions out of him this year. Now, is he going to become Cordero Patterson? I highly doubt it, but because there's only one, frankly. But I don't know why this was ever really a big storyline other than the fact that Hard Knocks kind of played it up as such, and the way that Velus' first 2 years went kind of put him in this position where it felt like now or never.
No, I agree with that, but do you? I guess here's my big question with this. When you look at the production level, right, with guys like Dominique Robinson, with guys like Velus Jones, I would say, and I think most people around the NFL would say, they're not 52 and 53, especially with what you saw released from this roster. If we want to talk about Ja'Tyre Carter not being that level of guy, I'm with you on that. But can we say that Ja'Tyre Carter has had zero production at an NFL level? I don't think we can say that. And so with Velus, with Dom Rob, right? Like, yep. I guess if there's been some production, it's not out of body to say, but can we say that they've had that level of production to make this team? I'm a little bit surprised that those are two names that are on this team, even though they've been given the reps.
Let's talk about Dom Rob then, because that was one that also felt like a now or never situation. And he admitted that. He knew that special teams and the role that he has on coverage units, which was different, especially in kickoff coverage, they're using different body types to block. He doesn't have to run as far as he did before. I mean, it's little things like that made his job and his role in getting onto this roster more beneficial than somebody else. And you got to listen closely to what these coaches are saying. When you hear Matt Eberflus shout out guys like Dominique Robinson, Daniel Hardy, DeMarcus Walker, who we knew DeMarcus Walker was making the roster. Daniel Hardy is a backup, but like he had a great camp. He put it together this year. He made the initial 53, and they kept 6 defensive ends, which we'll see if that sticks. But just hearing Matt Eberflus talk about Dominique Robinson and seeing, talking about what he's seen from him the last couple of weeks, that indicated that that's somebody that you expected to still be around. I mean, hell, who did he shout out on the offensive line where we were all kind of like, a couple of weeks ago? Bill Murray, who made the initial 53-man roster. Bill Murray. Like, follow the clues here. They're leaving a trail of beans for everybody to, pick up, and it leads you to an answer. These coaches, for as much as they don't want to say anything, sometimes they drop hints without even realizing they're doing it.
Right. No, 100%. I just think that I guess the question would be in the long term, right? Is there a blind spot for Ryan Poles' draft picks? But at the end of the day, you're talking about guys that are 52 and 53 on the roster. You feel better about the situation that you're in right now with how the Bears have added to it, how Ryan Poles has added to it. So I don't think that the Bears at all are in a bad situation. One thing that we got that I thought was very interesting this weekend was we got a lot of the IR names, or the guys that haven't been waived but have been put on injury reserve and stuff like that. Where they're, first off, when the heck did Ian Wheeler get hurt? Well, I guess this is the first pod we've had since that. When did Ian Wheeler get hurt?
He got hurt. That's the reason he exited the game in Kansas City. So, it's unfortunate, for him. A torn ACL means that his season's over. And this is a guy too who's trying to make the roster. And I hate it for him because he was a
Yes.
prime candidate for the practice squad, and you hope that he's able to recover at some point because eventually he's going to want to go to med school. Remember, like he's got other aspirations than being a football player, but based on how his injury heals and how long it takes, will he have a shot next year? Like that's a really tough spot for an undrafted free agent to be in.
Courtney, what happens first? Does Ian Wheeler sign with the Dallas Cowboys, or does he go to med school? That's the question right
Yeah,
now.
that's a great question. Depends who they sign. I heard they had like a bunch of running backs in to try to fix that gaping hole that they have down there. But hey, good for Ian Wheeler, like in terms of like what his future aspirations are beyond football. I just hate it for him that he got injured, and that one was Saturday that he was put on injured reserve.
Yeah. Yeah, that one sucks. That one sucks for sure. I mean, listen, there's been a lot of exodus from this team. I don't think there's been a ton of surprise, which is good as far as a fan standpoint, which is good as far as an organizational standpoint, because years past, right, there have been guys that we've talked about as like, you can't get rid of this guy.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden he's gone and you're like, well, this team's going to be terrible without him. And they would have been terrible with him, right? But have there been anybody who's been released from other teams, anybody who's out there that you look at and you say, that's going to be a great addition by the Chicago Bears, even with how stacked this team currently is
I'll
right
be
now?
honest, I haven't seen that many other teams like cuts. There haven't like the biggest name I remember seeing today was probably Frank Gore Jr. when he got released from
Yes.
Buffalo. They
Yeah.
already have a running back room that's set, so like it's not an option for Chicago. I don't know, like you'd think if you're looking to upgrade certain positions, well, which ones are they still? Probably the defensive line. So they had 6
Yep.
defensive ends go onto the roster: Montez Sweat, Dominique Rob, or excuse me, we'll start in order: Montez Sweat, DeMarcus Walker, Daniel Hardy, Austin Booker, Darrell Taylor, and Dominique Robinson.
Dominique Robinson.
Dominique Robinson, and then of course the defensive tackles, everybody from Dexter to Billings to Chris Williams, the guy that they just brought in, and then Pickens. So numbers wise, they're set right now. But if they feel at some point they can upgrade, and I don't think it'll be now, like the big names are not on the market at this point. So like they're not available. Like names that would be like impact game changing names. I just feel like they're in a spot where they are going to roll with who they have. And that becomes the question of, well, how do you, if your pass rush is not very good again this year, like it was last year, just in terms of pressuring the quarterback, what do you do to upgrade it? Is that something that you have to address via the trade deadline? The answer is probably going to be yes. If they feel that they're a contending team this year, even if they feel that there's somebody who might be headed towards free agency soon in the last year of a contract, kind of like a Montez Sweat situation, Ryan Poles has shown he has no issue doing business at that time of the calendar year and season. But I don't think that there's going to be, people look at this defensive end group, like, are these 6 going to stick? I don't think there's going to be any like major additions at that position outside of like how they decided to put these 6 on the initial 53.
How comfortable do you feel the team is right now when you look at some of the additions they made, late round additions, right? And that's what I'm imploring people to realize, right? We're talking about 6th round picks. We're talking about late round picks in the future, right? Multiple 6 that, you're kind of okay moving off of. Do you feel like the guys that were brought in, or Darrell Taylor, who was brought in, 21 and a half sack guy over 3 seasons, that's not a bad name to add. But do you feel like the Bears feel comfortable where they're at right now entering the season? Or is there a little bit of nervousness around this team, especially on the lines?
No, I do feel like they're a lot more comfortable than they were this time a year ago. I remember like talking with people inside Hallis Hall, and there was this, this time last year, there was a lot of hype around this Bears team. And there were people inside the building saying, pump the brakes. We're not sure we're going to be ready to go. First off, all the injuries, and just like from a talent perspective, the roster looked a lot different 12 months ago. However, even with like, Darrell Taylor and Chris Williams, I know it sounds like, hey, 6th round pick for this guy, 7th round, pick swap effectively for the other guy. There's still additions that the Bears felt that were better than, okay, let's just comb through all the cuts. Like, they were players who they were eyeing as potential cuts on somebody else's roster, or, players they could get on the cheap, and using a late day 3 pick is a smart way to go about it. Are those guys better than somebody you can sign off of cuts off the pool that's now available, nearly 1,000 players? Probably, because otherwise they wouldn't have done that. They would have ended up
Right.
keeping, the roster the way it was and signing somebody tomorrow or even later in the week or whenever there's a need. Because those guys, if they don't sign anywhere, they just revert to being straight free agents, and they're going to be available until they're not.
What does that say about a confidence level on that opposite edge of Montez Sweat right now, though, right? You talk about DeMarcus Walker. We heard the praise that Austin Booker got on Hard Knocks, right? And we know that they were looking to go get Matthew Judon. When you bring in a guy like Darrell Taylor, when you bring in those guys who can attack the edge, do you feel like the Bears feel like that is still a major need on this team?
I mean, let's not be dumb. Like, Darrell Taylor is not Matthew Judon. I know Matthew Judon's 32 years old. He's coming off of a bicep injury. Like, they're not the same player, but it's still an aggressive approach to try to find somebody to pair with Montez Sweat on the opposite side of that defensive line. Now, what Flus said on Saturday is that this is a position that they anticipate, like at least that role, they said they're going to ride the hot hand. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Could it still be DeMarcus Walker? Sure. It's not the idea of, well, I don't know why you traded for this guy if he's not going to be the starting defensive end opposite Montez Sweat. Like, he does have production. In 2 years, just about 20 BC, his first year he was injured because I think
9.5.
Yeah, no.
Well,
no,
first year 2020 didn't play.
So yeah, he didn't play. So but he, 2021 through 2023, 3 seasons, he got 21 and a half sacks, and he started only a handful of those games. He's got the production that made it valuable to the Bears to send a draft pick to go get him. Does that mean he's going to start? I think we're going to honestly have to wait and see. I do kind of look at that situation and think if he can outplay DeMarcus Walker, and even then, like kicking DeMarcus Walker inside in certain sub packages is something that they've done before, and it's something that they could do again. But it's not nearly the upgrade that they would have had. Like, you would have had your 2 edge rushers set. If they were able to land Matthew Judon last week, it would have been Judon and it would have been Montez Sweat. And Judon could have...
You knew what it was.
You knew what it was. But it's just not the case right now. And we'll see how those things work out. But the way they look at it is that they got somebody who is better than anybody in the cut pool, at least who they anticipated being cuts. Maybe that opinion changes when they see everybody's list. But the way that they anticipated it, he's better than any of the other options that they thought they could have gone after, potentially as cuts.
Yeah, I think, again, right, the question for most Bears fans is 21 and a half sacks, 3 seasons, didn't play the rookie season. He's on his 4th-year deal. Is this just a money issue that the Patriots were willing to go, we don't need you? Why wasn't he playing? Why wasn't he a part of this team? What are your thoughts on that? No, I'm talking about Darrell Taylor here.
Well, I mean, didn't they just have an injury yesterday? And like they had to go out and sign Trevis Gibson, who was with the Bears for the first year under Ryan Poles. He was part of the previous regime. Kind of like, it sounds like depth. It sounds like, fit too. I mean, when we talked to Darrell Taylor the other day, I mean, he's going from Pete Carroll's defense to learning Mike McDonald's defense, and that's a 3-4, so his role changed. Now he's going back to being in a 4-3, and he knows what his role is. It's a better scheme fit for him here. So I don't think, because he was a restricted free agent because, to explain it just like the easiest terms, that because he missed that first full season as a rookie, and I believe it was because he was on NFI because it was an injury that he sustained while still in college. Like, it didn't give him the normal like rookie, the rookie timeline to where he would have been as a 2nd-round pick, like, going into a contract year in 2024.
Right.
So like money-wise, it could have been that. I also think just like overall fit in Seattle in this new scheme, that there were just other guys that they felt were a better fit, and that made him expendable. Now, I'm sure like after the injury happened the other day, they probably would want their 6th-round pick, or would want their, want their player back instead of just having an extra 6th-round pick to do something with.
Right.
But that's the way it goes.
Yeah. Sometimes that's the funny part about this time of year. Sometimes it's literally just the second you trade somebody, we could have used that guy again. And that is, I think, for Bears fans right now, the Bears being on the right side of this. I mean, when you look at camp, when you look at the long term, the injury bug right now is the best that it's been in the last 3 years. You feel good about it. You can make some additions based on that. I think that most Bears fans will be excited by the addition of Darrell Taylor. And at the end of the day, having somebody, and I love how Flus said this, I think that because his position is defined, right? Especially with some of the guys that have been brought in. A defined position may make that guy be a better player than what we've seen from him in his time in New England. So I'm excited about the addition of Darrell Taylor as well. At the end of the day, Courtney, was there anything from today that surprised you? Was there anything from today that shocked you? Or do you think that for the first time in 3 years, this is business as usual?
This was a quiet cut down day. It really was. And I mean, yeah, there were names the last couple of years like that you wondered about. But really like nothing that like jumped off the page. Like I've covered cut down days that have been way more eventful than the ones that we've had in Chicago since 2022. Today was as expected. Most of the names that you see on there are, at least the cuts that were released today, were either veterans who had been bouncing around for a while, who are probably practice squad candidates, or UDFA rookies that they brought in as camp bodies. And some of that can apply to some vets too. But I mean, hell, think about last year. PJ Walker, who they signed, paid $5.5 million for him to come to Chicago to be the number 2 quarterback, and he gets beat out by a Division II guy who is now their number 2 quarterback. That was a pretty big story. And Alex Leatherwood, a guy they had claimed, picked up all those guarantees the year before, ends up getting cut right before cut down day happened last year. So that was way more eventful than anything we saw today.
No, yeah, 100%. I think the thing that I love about Ryan Poles is the ability to say, let's take a chance. Maybe I'll get beat on this. Maybe I'll get called out for this. Maybe I'll have a problem with this after it's done. But a PJ Washington, a Alex Leatherwood, those are names of guys who you were like, well, if you pick their money up, you expect something from them. And you got nothing from them, realistically, on this Bears team. So I think that, you know, his ability to take a chance, it's put us in this position, and I'm excited about that. And I think that's the best situation for the Bears long term. But for Courtney Cronin, like I said, I'm Pat the Designer. I'm excited. I think that this is a very uneventful cut down day, and that's a good thing, Bears fans. Be excited about that. I do want to let you guys know to hit that like button, subscribe to the page, leave a 5-star review. Y'all know what to do. If any news breaks, you know you can count on us here at the Chicago Bears Podcast to be on top of that. As always, man, y'all stay safe out there, Chicago. Bear down. One love. Peace.